This is a video I wanted to record to explain one of the patterns I like to use when using Redux. It's called selectors, and basically there's a few reasons I like this pattern. One is it abstracts away from the component where the actual data is stored in the Redux store. The second use case would be when you have derived data from your state. So let's say you have a bunch of different properties in your Redux store that you want to compute something on or derive some other data from. Putting this logic directly into the component, one, makes it not as usable, but two, it just adds complexity to the component. So you can add that kind of logic into your selectors. And another added benefit, if you want to go this route for some performance benefits, is that you can kind of memorize these selectors so that using something like Redux Reselect, so that they don't have to be recomputed if the inputs are the same. So it doesn't really make sense for like simple use cases where you're just retrieving a piece of the Redux store. But if you're doing anything that takes a while or is expensive to do, then using something like Reselect would definitely speed this up. So if you haven't already figured it out, Redux Selectors is basically just functions that you pass in the entire Redux store, and then they return some data for you. So I'm going to do a live coding example of how this might work. So I've set up a quick create React app and Redux store. This is a bit of a contrived example because I don't want to get too complicated with the example. But let's say this is our Redux store, the initial state. Right now we have a reducer and all it does is return the state. There is no actual mutating of any of this data. We're just getting it. But let's say we have a Redux store that looks like this. It has a user property with a bunch of information about a user. It has, that includes an address where there's the address fields. And then separately there's something else called a session. I just kind of made this up as a simple use case, but let's say it stores whether this user is logged in right now and their language preference. So if I were to create a user component, which I already have set up here, and I'm using the map state to props kind of pattern, which I'm assuming everybody watching this kind of understands how Redux works and React Redux works. Map states to props is, this could be called anything, but it's traditionally called map state to props, and it's just the first argument to your Redux React Redux connect function call. And it's a function that gets the entire Redux store, and then you return the data that you want passed in as props to your connected component. So let's say, obviously I want to display the user's name. So this is using some ES6 shorthand notation, but anyways, so if the state's getting passed in, actually I'm gonna even replace this with just the parts of the state that I care about. So there's a user, as we know. So let's say I just want to grab the entire user and then return it as a prop. So that means up here in my component, it's going to get passed. So the first argument to this functional component is always props, but I'm going to do a little shorthand destructuring. And just grab the user prop immediately. And I'm just going to print, or not print, but render user dot first name space user dot last name. So hopefully this works. There it is. User first name and last name. Simple enough. Let's say I want to also include the address. Well, since I grabbed the entire user object, I have access to it. But let's say I'm going to cheat a little bit here, and let's say we're trying to be really efficient with only the data that we pass into this user. So instead of passing the entire user, we're going to pass in first name, first name, last name, and address. So this way of destructuring is actually giving me back these three basically variables. So instead of the entire user, I'm going to return these, and up here it's basically going to, since these are the props that are going to be passed in, I'm going to change that. I can get rid of user. All right, first let's just see if this works. Okay, it worked. So now let's say I want to display the address. So it was address.street, and then let's do a BR. All right, let me format this better. Address.street, address.city, comma, address dot, oops, address dot state, and I'll just put it on this line, address dot zip code. All right, let's see what happens. Address is not defined. Oh, because I spelled it wrong. There. Here's our address, here's our name. So this isn't terrible, but obviously this is getting a little bit complex. If we were only going to display a few properties of address, I might even destructure it more and just get those properties. But let's say we want to do some computed logic in here. So let me go back to the reducer. So here I have a gender and a marital status, and I'm going to, based on their gender and their marital status, display some kind of prefix like Mr., Mrs., or Miss. So what I might do, well, first of all, I need those properties, marital status and gender. Is it gender? Yeah. Here, let me reformat this code. Okay. Looks a little weird, but okay. So these get passed to here, and they get passed to here. Cool. Nothing's broken. What I might do is, if gender, let me put it in parentheses, if gender equals female, then I'm going to use a nested ternary here. If marital status equals married, so if a female and married, then we're going to return Mrs. Else, oops, there we go. Mrs. Else, we're going to return Miss. Else, we're going to return Mr. I know this might be a little bit confusing. Let me reformat it. Boom. Let's see if it works. It should say Mr. Okay. I'll put a space there. Mr. And then let me make sure this works. So, oops, gender is just a single letter. So, still says Mr. If I change my gender to female and married, I should say Mrs. And if it's not married, let's say single, it's Miss. There. I'll change it all back. Okay. So this works. Obviously, it'd be kind of nice to have this computed for us somewhere else, maybe, especially if we're going to display this kind of thing in multiple places. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this using Redux selectors. So first, I have to write some selectors. All right, so selectors are just functions that take the entire Redux state and then return something. So as a normal convention, what I like to use is for each one of these top level keys in our store, I write something to get, I write a selector to get just that section. So we have a user and a session. So what I would do, export const, and then I always prefix it with get, just a convention I like. So get user, and I always add section to these top level sections. So get user section. Remember, it's a function that gets the entire state from Redux and returns a piece of it. So what we want is state.user. Let's write one for get session section state.session. Okay, doesn't seem very interesting yet. But let's say first thing I want to replace is this complex logic for displaying like a friendly name, full name, let's say. So what I might do is create a new selector, and what's cool about selectors is they should be composable in the sense that I don't have to rewrite sections that already have selectors for it. So I know that, let's say I'm writing one called get user full name. Let's just call it full name. I know it's going to use the user part of the store, so it's gonna call, well, this is going to be more complicated. So it's gonna get the user data. So const user equals get user section. Let's pass that state right in. Now I got the user section. And then I'm gonna move this logic, this ternary logic, into the selector. User.gender, user.marital status. And let me replace, just because I like it. And then first name and last name. So what I want to return is interpolated string with, sorry, will be prefix. So prefix space user dot first name space user dot last name. So let me put this back because I'm going to actually leave this component as is and set up a user 2 to use this pattern. So let me quickly add it to the app. I'll keep both of them so you can see them. So let's just make sure this is working. User 2. There. Both being rendered. Okay. So let's say I want it to look exactly the same. So the difference is, first of all, I'll need to import this function, the selector, get user full name from dot selectors and then my map dispatch to props, map state to props is going to look much different. So I'm going to call the prop user full name. Sorry. And then it's going to call this function with state. So right away, so the prop here, remember, is called user full name. So let's destructure that out of props so we have direct access to it. And the moment of truth, let's see if it works. Boom. Mr. JP Candelier. It works. The next thing I want to get is the address. So I already have a selector. Oh no, I don't. So let's make one. Let's make one to get the address. So like I said, we're gonna kind of compose these in a sense. So export user address. Get user address. Remember, it's a function that gets state. And then all this really is going to do is return the get user section. So that's the user section dot address. So go back into user 2. Let's import it. Let's say address is this. So I broke something. Get user address is not exported. Get user address, export const. Okay. So now I should be able to have access to that. Let me copy and paste this paragraph because that is going to be exactly the same, but the way I got it out of the store was via this. All right. Oh yeah, so I set it in map state to props, but I forgot to grab it off props in my actual component. All right, there it is. Looks exactly the same. Let me do a side-by-side comparison of the two so far. So remember our map states to prop looked like this. Granted, it could have been a little simpler if I just returned the entire user object. I know it's a little bit contrived the way I'm doing it, but you can see the obvious benefit. One, we don't have to know where anything is in the store. We just need to know that this exists and this exists. Get user full name, selector, get user address. And then just pass in the state and we have it as a prop. So another thing which is nice, let's say this also we want to use in the reducer something from this session, right? Like is logged in. We want our user component to show something if they're logged in. So the way we would do that in the old brute force method would be we'd want the session part of the store, and we need to know that. And then, well, let's even get more clever, is logged in. That's all we care about. So we're getting this, and we're going to pass it in as a prop to our component. Sorry, I just reformatted it. And then I want to show here something like if logged in, show just a message that says logged in. Let's see if it works. So it does say logged in. Let's make sure. Okay, logged in is true. Let's change it to false. It does not say logged in. Let's change it back to true. All right, so that's how we added another piece of the Redux store. So we could do this, but keep in mind we had to know that in Redux it's stored under the session and in a property called isLoggedIn. But if we were to make a new selector for this, we already have one for the session section, so let's just get the logged in status, right? So get session logged in goal state. It's always takes the whole state. Now, because as part of this, we're gonna return the session section dot is logged in. So now we have this new selector here. So in our user2 component, let's import it and add a new prop. So is logged in state. That's going to pass in a new prop to our component called is logged in. Now let me copy and paste this. It's exactly the same. So now they both should say is logged in. Yes, they do. All right, so let me bring that back up. Once again, this is growing. The one using selectors is growing not as fast as this component, and the complexity is obviously much less complex. I think I'm going to stop the demonstration there, but one thing to notice is that just having to know and extract data out of Redux by knowing the raw format of the data in the Redux store is kind of mentally consuming, and it's also just adds extra complexity to it. And then the full name example, it's not that complex, but you can see how it would be much nicer to have this kind of derived data coming straight from a selector, so we don't have to look at this kind of logic directly in the component. And plus, now anywhere we need the full name, we can do it without knowing exactly where in the Redux store it is and how to string it all together. So just to wrap things up, selectors are basically just kind of utility functions that take the entire Redux store and return either different parts that you need or some derived state. All right, I hope this was helpful and not super confusing, but obviously you can ask me any questions about it in person. Thanks.